Hey, Dr. Goodwin, at the end of this panel, I'm going to turn to you and say, okay, doctor, we got it in. What things should we keep our eye open about? I mean, when projects like this come in, one of the things we like to do is, are there broad questions that occur to all of us that are worth knowing about, and we're puzzling through it? So I will come back to you for that at the end. Who's next?
Well, I think we'll hear from Mr. Polkovich.
Okay, good. For the county.
All right, good afternoon, Chair Eisenberg, members of the council. Phil Pogoletich, Senior Deputy County Counsel, representing Yolo County here today. I have to start with a bit of a caveat in that the Board of Supervisors hasn't had a chance to look at this project, and as Byron mentioned, the EIR will be coming out relatively soon, so that comment period will give us the chance to take this before the board and get their initial feedback to it. The board did respond to a notice of preparation of the EIR almost 2 years ago now, and so most of my comments today draw on the comments we made at the time, which I think still represent, by and large, what the county's issues, concerns, points of interest with the project are likely to be. And really to start with the positives of the project, the location of it, I mean, relative to other places that habitat restoration could occur in the county, setting aside the type of restoration. We're happy to see it in the bypass, down in the southern part of the bypass, on land that, by and large, at least, is used for grazing instead of the production of high-value agricultural commodities. That said, the impacts of the project on farmland, the loss of farmland, the loss of the related multipliers that agriculture can have on the local economy are issues of a lot of interest to the county, including how the loss of farmland may be mitigated or otherwise addressed by the contractors. And then with regard to the economic impacts, we have, of course, the report or a report that the contractors have prepared. And that was something that the board had requested a couple of years ago, so we're happy to see that that's something that they have produced. We received it just recently, so I don't have a reaction to it today. By and large, you know, the numbers I saw on the screen, I believe, are derived from that report. And, you know, they look positive. They also, though, I believe, are regional numbers rather than Yolo County specific numbers. So in reviewing the report, that's an issue we'll take a look at just to better inform ourselves of, is this Yolo County economic impact or is it more of a regional economic impact? Also economically, the big slug of jobs and money that the project will generate will come up front in the first very few years. And there will be some, I believe it's over 100 full-time jobs spread out over the next 50 years for monitoring the project according to the numbers that Byron showed. So that's an important factor for us to balance against, you know, the negative economic aspect of losing some jobs associated with agriculture on this portion of that property. So really for us, the agricultural impacts of the project, how it fits in with agriculture on the rest of that property and surrounding properties are really at the forefront of the county's issues. I won't say concerns necessarily, but our interest in how this project fits in. Part of that also is that the property, as Byron mentioned, is in the Williamson Act. And we'd had some initial conversations a couple of years ago, both with the contractors and with the State Department of Conservation, as to how we address the issue of a habitat project going in on property that's currently in agricultural production and governed by a contract that contemplates only agricultural use. It doesn't contemplate conversion to open space or habitat uses. And I think we're all on the same page, and I'm not here today to try and negotiate anything, but that the proper way to proceed with the Williamson Act is to look at converting the existing agricultural contract to an open space contract, which will provide expressly for the types of uses that are contemplated on this portion of the property. So that's an issue that we'll be working through over the coming months, I believe, with the contractors as well. From a regulatory perspective, the county has a number of ordinances that we believe are applicable to the project, ranging from ministerial level approvals such as grading permits to a flood hazard development ordinance, which we've applied to projects in the bypass and elsewhere in floodplains in the county where there's a potential encroachment. And it's not dissimilar from state processes where the applicant produces studies documenting how a project affects flood protection, affects the level and rate of flood flow across the land, and we look to see whether there's any detrimental impact Typically there isn't. We issue the permit, and the project goes forward. At the time this first went to the board, just for comments on the notice of preparation a couple of years ago, the county, as I believe the council is aware, had in effect a moratorium on certain types of habitat projects. That moratorium expired in late October of this year. We're looking at adopting a use permit requirement for certain types of habitat projects within the relatively near future. That notion has been on the table since about 2008, when the Board of Supervisors first started looking at mitigation banks.
What kind of projects are likely to be subject to the proposed ordinance?
We've tried to draw it up to define its scope as including projects that are undertaken in the county to mitigate for impacts to biological resources outside the county. That could include developers coming in from another jurisdiction looking to buy land to mitigate Swainson's hawk effects in the county of a residential project elsewhere, and we've had a number of those inquiries over the years. It could include mitigation banks undertaken in the county with service areas that go beyond the county itself, and it's also intended to include projects such as this that would be undertaken to implement the biological opinions or potentially BDCP down the road, to the extent that the project proponents and other features of the project make it subject to the county's jurisdiction. So that's something the board is looking at, and I expect will take up for consideration at one of its January meetings. Whether adoption happens then or happens a bit later on, I'm not certain, but it's an issue we're continuing to look at. Other issues of interest to the county, and I'll move through these a little bit more quickly. The long-term stewardship and care of the property once it's converted to the various habitat uses is of interest to us, primarily to ensure that the property is maintained responsibly and that there aren't any things that occur that could affect adjoining property owners. So ways to deal with trespass on the property, ways to deal with any invasive weeds that would become an issue to adjoining property owners. Things of that nature would be of interest to the county. We've noted in the past, and of course we'll be talking in the future, about how this project fits into the Delta Plan. It sounds as if it's going to be, the ground may break on the project before the Delta Plan and its regulations are finally in effect, but nonetheless...
Better close those settlement discussions fast.
Yeah, at least it informs, I think, everybody's consideration of the project. And I haven't double-checked this, but I believe it's within the primary zone of the Delta, so it would be subject to the...
Secondary zone.
Is it secondary zone?
I'm trying to think.
Okay. Well,
one of these maps...
if it's not in the primary zone, then Delta Protection Commission and Land Use Resource Management Plan is not an issue.
I can't tell for sure.
Yeah, it may be outside the primary zone. I recall raising this issue before, but it could be that with the primary zone map being drawn at the scale...
No, you could be right. You could be right. Yeah.
Okay. Well, if that applies, then it applies.
So you have to appear in front of Mr. Natoli. He's tough.
Conceivably. Well, he's certainly tough. Whether the project appears in front of him is something else. Effects on the existing biological resources on the property. That would include Swainson's hawk foraging habitat, and I'm comfortable that that's going to be fully addressed in the EIR. We'd have some curiosity about whether county roads would be impacted by construction of the project, including any trucking associated with hauling soil. If they use the preferred RD 2068 location, that may be minimal or no effect, but otherwise that's a potential issue. And then initially we had hoped that there would be some opportunities for public access and recreation on the property. Its remote location and just other features associated with the restoration, at least in initial conversations that took place a while ago, make it seem as if the initial hope of having some public recreation on the property may be fairly dim. But I expect we'll talk about that a bit more in months to come as well. So overall, from a county perspective, it's a project that it's interesting to us. It doesn't hold the potential in many ways to directly affect our agricultural economy by converting high-value cropland and otherwise causing effects that are of concern to the county with certain proposals included in the draft BDCP. But nonetheless, the agricultural impacts of the project are something that we're going to take a close look at, I'm sure, in the coming months. That concludes my comments from a county perspective.
Thank you. Mr. Ray?
Yeah, I think now we'll hear from Ron Unger, and represents the Department of Water Resources, and talk a little about the flood concerns here and what the opportunities are to coordinate this project with some of the other things that are happening in terms of planning for the Yolo bypasses.
And the guy who's going to sign the credit purchase agreement, according to this handout, or somebody is, with DWR.
Well, thank you, Phil. Is this my comment?
Press the red button on the
Okay, I
mic.
thought I did. Okay, there we go. Phil and members of the council, thank you. I won't specifically be the person signing those checks, but I'm happy to represent the department here today. And I'm here with Paul Marshall. If you have any specific detailed questions that are directed for the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan and that I cannot answer. So the department's perspective on this appears to be a very promising project. The department's role and responsibilities with respect to this area are to protect the public safety, the ecosystem enhancement, and the economic sustainability of the Central Valley and the state resources. With respect to the Central Valley, the department, as you know, recently prepared a landmark Central Valley Flood Protection Plan to protect those resources in the valley. Over 1 million people in the valley now and growing, and billions of dollars of resources at stake. So the next step is to do regional plans with the county, with the RDs, and other local entities to make sure that their interests, their priorities are met with respect to the state plan of flood control, the hundreds of miles in the valley, facilities that we all know need severe repair and much more money to prevent what is happening when a Sandy or a Katrina hits our area. The plan, the Yolo bypass, must in the future have the capability of handling more conveyance capacity of floodwater. We don't know what that plan will be yet and it looks like the plan for this project will be done before the regional plans will be done. So it's important to have the resilience that will enable more floodwater capacity through this bottleneck area at the base of the Yolo bypass. That'll be one thing we'll be looking for, and insurance that the roughness is not increased to prevent that floodwater conveyance. As far as the habitat value and the economic benefits, this looks very promising, and so we look forward to reviewing the EIR, draft EIR, and making comment on it. And that's it.
Okay. Mr. Shapiro.
Thank you very much. My name is Scott Shapiro. I'm counsel for Reclamation District 2068, which is the reclamation district that's immediately adjacent to the property site on the west side, with the project levee separating the project site and the reclamation district. On the map that we were looking at, it's just beyond that brown thick line that Byron mentioned as where the spoils might go. To put it in context, if you're not connecting the dots, you're usually seeing Mike Hardesty, who's general manager of Reclamation District 2068, but he had a board meeting today, so he asked me to attend on his behalf. Reclamation District 2068 provides both water supply and reclamation, flood protection to those lands. And Mike's duties started when he was hired, dealing primarily with water supply, and over the years the water kind of takes care of itself a little bit more in that neck of the woods, but the flood protection becomes a bigger and bigger issue. The levee that is between the project site and Reclamation District 2068 is a relatively high levee. It seems relatively stable. The challenges we have with that levee are erosion. As the project site gets inundated on a somewhat regular basis, that inundated water or that inundated land ends up eroding the toe of the levee. And the concern is that over time this could become an issue, and much of Mike's effort is spent ensuring that erosion doesn't get out of control through constantly rebuilding that section or potentially riprap, none of which is really an ideal solution. Now, as we talked about earlier, and as a few of the other panelists talked about, under current law, this project can't negatively impact the bypass from a flood protection perspective. If it did, it wouldn't be able to get the permits it needs. And so we're imagining that from a flood protection perspective, the project is neutral, and assuming the law is enforced properly, it will be neutral. So the question for Reclamation District 2068 as a neighbor, as an adjoining landowner and adjoining land use is, are we neutral on the project or are we supportive of the project? And the board and Mike would very much like to be supportive of the project, and we envision the scenario where we can be supportive, and that's where it becomes a win-win. It's a win for habitat creation, and it's a win for flood protection, not so much by excavating soil out, because as I think it was stated, that's much more at the noise level, rather by placing that extra soil against the existing levee. And so that existing levee has approximately a 3-to-1 slope. That's a typical levee slope, and that kind of a levee is very susceptible to erosion. And so going back to Byron's key term of sacrificial berm, which I agree with, I think it's an excellent term, what we're really talking about doing is taking that levee and piling additional soil on it, properly compacted, making sure that it's all appropriate, working with the Corps of Engineers and the Central Valley Flood Protection Board to make sure there's no problems, and extending that to something like a 6-to-1 or 8-to-1 or 10-to-1 slope. And by doing that, we can really give that levee much more erosion resistance, and to the extent that it is eroded, maybe we extend the life of that levee by 20 or 30 or 40 years simply by putting the soil against it. We believe that that's the lowest cost disposal option. We also believe it's probably the least environmental impacting solution, much as Yolo County has indicated. There can be air quality concerns, trucking all that material out, where you would put it, but we think putting it right there and reducing all of those impacts is a great thing. So in sum, I guess what RD 2068 would say, and this has gone to the board several times for discussion, is this is an interesting project, doesn't seem to hurt anyone. It's next door, that's fine. It has the potential to be a win-win, though. If the soil can be placed against these levees, we can really make sure that they are resistant to erosion, and this area can have much better protection. And so we look forward to being supporters of the project if we can get that win-win.
Win-win sounds like people are going to reach a negotiated settlement where money is the equalizer or in-kind services. You want the dirt that they're going to move somewhere piled up against your walls, either at their cost or they give you money to do it yourself? I mean, I don't think that's an ignoble motive, by the way.
Yeah, you're not you're perceptive on.
I'm in the ballpark.
You're in the ballpark. The issue for 2068 is it is a very low economically viable district. Mm-hmm. It just doesn't have a lot of resources. And if you think about it big picture, what are these levees protecting 2068 from? They're protecting it from water which wasn't here originally. Right? They're protecting it from water which is in a bypass which was placed here to largely take the water away from urban areas. And so these are farmers who have to maintain a levee in order to protect themselves from water which has been brought into their neighborhood. It's difficult.
Isn't this part of the floodplain?
It is, but
it
did not historically flood to anywhere near the extent as a result of the bypass system as it would have historically. And there is highland within the district once you go not too far in where the water had never gone up above that before the bypass was created. So from their perspective, they are enthusiastic about the idea of strengthening these levees. They just don't have the financial resources to do so. They're not looking to make money. What they're looking to do is not basically go terribly in debt in order to get their levees strengthened. And we also believe that we're the lowest cost disposal site, and it's likely lower cost for the water agency to be able to place this material here than truck it elsewhere. So that's why we call it a win-win.
Comment on that. I think that's generally right. It really isn't a negotiation over money. We've actually got a set of terms we're pretty comfortable with between us and RD 2068. If there is that amount of excavated spoil that requires us to have a site
But
such
you
as the
don't know
West
that
Lake.
because you advised us earlier, you're looking for ideas on modifications and adjustments.
Yeah,
to
we're
the-
in a,
yeah.
permit process with a lot of people laying hands on it, and there's others that want to go to a design that involves a lot less excavation. That could help us economically, biologically, if it meets the requirements, that makes sense. It's less environmentally impactful. It may not produce the amount of spoil that could actually perform this. At current proposed design, that is, Scott's absolutely right, it's the cheapest alternative, but the landowner, Westlands Water District, has not signed off on that alternative. They ultimately have a last say on that. That design alternative is still in play, and we're looking at it with the biologists that are ultimately going to have to approve this through the fisheries agencies. There may come out that we have a design that doesn't move that much dirt, and so we'll just have to see where that comes out. But it's in play. We'd love to have a win-win. If we end up moving that much, that absolutely is the cheapest solution for us and a win-win, but it may not be acceptable to the owner of the land.
Mr. Natoli. Mr. Pokladich, is it fair to say that the county sees no realistic opportunity of any urbanizing development ever occurring in this property?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. And it's being farmed there now and periodically flooded kind of in bits and pieces. So the real issue is taking a certain amount of farmland out of production, losing some jobs compared to the other beneficial factors. I'm not saying these figures are right, but these are typical considerations.
Yeah, I think we'll look at it on balance with all the different factors that we've talked about today.
And how does that affect the county roads nearby? I didn't understand
Well, my only
that part
thought
of your
on
argument.
my only concern with roads is, and I don't remember the details of the RD 2068 proposal well enough to recall if the dirt will be transported by a barge that short distance or trucks, or if county roads are involved at all. I do recall discussions about alternative
Oh,
disposal
you were
sites.
talking about in moving the fill, not the.
Exactly
I'm sorry,
right,
I
yeah.
misunderstood that.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
And
Got it.
just to that point, if we did the on-site internal disposal, it'd just be scrapers and trucks within the property boundaries, and actually our off-site disposal options involved actually slurry pipelines to move it is the cheapest alternative. So we probably don't have a trucking one. It possibly could come. We could go to the west levee side, and in that event, we might either do the slurry or the trucks. It might be
Hold on.
competitive, but trucks are probably not going to be in the equation at the end of the day.
I
Scrapers are.
I'm visualizing in my own mind the requirement that Mr. Buck and his friends would have to, by hand with wheelbarrows, move this dirt as a way to mitigate the damage, which would be a first time, but not, worth considering, right?
Yeah, but dirt's dull, but as it turns out, it's the driver in the economics of this project. It's heavy. It's a $25 million swing between an on-site option versus the off-site ones that then we have to pick up and move in another restoration down the line, because these projects never really line up in time unless you wait forever, and waiting forever is not an option. So we really want to avoid picking it up and moving it twice.
Got it. Okay.